In the early 1970s, Marilyn Chambers didn't just appear in American homes. She represented them. Her face was soft, familiar, reassuring. The kind of image designed to dissolve into the background of daily life. Kitchens, bathrooms, television screens glowing quietly in the evening. She was youth without danger, beauty without controversy, a promise of wholesomeness carefully engineered by an industry that thrived on trust. At the time, few people knew her name. They didn't need to. She was a symbol, not a personality, the embodiment of cleanliness, simplicity, and suburban certainty. In a country wrestling with protest, war, and cultural upheaval, this image felt intentionally untouched. But behind that carefully constructed calm was a young woman still searching for her place. Marilyn Chambers was ambitious, restless, and already drifting toward a world far removed from the one she appeared to represent. Modeling paid the bills. Small acting roles hinted at something more. Yet nothing about her private trajectory suggested she would become a fault line in American culture. What the public saw was purity. What they didn't see was proximity to a choice that would shatter that illusion completely. One decision, one role, and an image America thought it owned was about to collapse. The decision wasn't made with spectacle in mind. There was no grand rebellion, no announcement, no sense that history was about to be rewritten. It was work. By the early 1970s, Marilyn Chambers was one of countless young performers navigating the thin margins of opportunity. Modeling contracts came and went. Acting roles were scarce, disposable, and often forgettable. The industry offered attention without stability, visibility without security. Like many before her, she followed the work where it appeared. The film was controversial by design, but it was also part of a growing underground movement testing the limits of censorship. To Marilyn, it wasn't framed as a provocation. It was a role, a chance to be seen, a chance to matter. What made the decision dangerous wasn't the film itself. It was the timing. At the same moment she stepped in front of one camera, her image was still circulating safely through another world entirely, a world built on trust, tradition, and moral certainty. Two versions of Marilyn now existed at once, moving silently toward each other. No contracts warned her, no executives intervened, no public alarm sounded. The collision was already set in motion. It simply hadn't been discovered yet. And when it was, there would be no separating the woman from the symbol ever again. The moment the film reached the public, the separation collapsed instantly. What had existed quietly in parallel was now impossible to ignore. Headlines moved faster than explanations. Images circulated without context. A single name was suddenly everywhere, repeated with disbelief, outrage, and fascination in equal measure. For the corporations tied to her image, panic set in. The response was swift and surgical. Contracts were severed. Statements were issued. Distance was created as publicly and decisively as possible. What had once been a marketing asset was now treated as a liability that needed to disappear. The irony was impossible to miss. An image sold as purity had become the backdrop for a national conversation about obscenity, morality, and control. Marilyn Chambers was no longer an individual making choices. She was a headline, a warning, a controversy packaged for consumption. Television hosts debated her. Newspapers dissected her. Audiences lined up in numbers that surprised even the industry producing the outrage. Condemnation and curiosity fed each other relentlessly. There was no path back to neutrality, no chance to explain intent, no space to exist quietly between extremes. Overnight, Marilyn Chambers became untouchable to one world and indispensable to another. The same culture that rejected her could not stop watching. The detonation was complete. What followed was no longer about a single film. Marilyn Chambers had crossed into a space where individuals dissolve and symbols take their place. To some, she represented moral collapse. To others, personal freedom. Her image was repurposed endlessly, stripped of nuance, forced to carry arguments far larger than her own life. The establishment treated her as a cautionary tale, proof that boundaries still existed and consequences would be enforced. At the same time, a growing counterculture elevated her as something else entirely, a figure who had exposed the hypocrisy buried inside American respectability. She hadn't set out to lead anything, yet she found herself at the center of debates about censorship, agency, and who was allowed to define a woman's choices. Every appearance, every interview, every photograph became evidence for one side or the other. Hollywood doors closed quietly, typecasting followed immediately. Roles outside the controversy vanished, replaced by offers that assumed she could only exist within a single narrative. The industry had decided who she was now. And still, she didn't retreat. Where many would have disappeared under the weight of public scrutiny, Marilyn remained visible, unapologetic, direct. She spoke without shame, refusing to perform regret for an audience that had already made up its mind. In doing so, she transformed again, no longer just the center of controversy, but proof that survival itself could be an act of defiance. With no path back to the version of fame she once brushed against, Marilyn Chambers made a quieter, more deliberate choice. She stayed. Rather than retreat from the spotlight that had turned hostile, she redirected it. If the industry insisted on defining her by a single moment, she would expand the frame herself. She continued working, not as an apology, but as a declaration. Acting, performing, recording music, appearing live, each step was a reminder that her identity could not be contained by one role or one scandal. This wasn't reinvention in the traditional sense, it was endurance. A refusal to vanish simply because the culture had decided it was finished with her complexity. She understood the limits placed on her, and she worked within them without surrendering to them. Audiences changed. So did the tone of the conversation. What once felt like outrage slowly became recognition. She was no longer just the woman at the center of a controversy. She was a professional who had outlasted the moment meant to erase her. There was power in that persistence. Not loud, not performative, but unmistakable. By continuing forward, Marilyn Chambers proved that survival didn't require forgiveness from institutions that had already turned away. It only required motion and the will to keep choosing herself when no one else would. Endurance came with consequences that never made headlines. Behind the persistence was exhaustion, years of being watched, interpreted, reduced. Fame without shelter, visibility without protection. The work continued, but so did the pressure of carrying a public identity that left little room for vulnerability. Like many who lived too long inside contradiction, Marilyn turned inward. Addiction crept in quietly, then all at once. Alcohol, drugs, not as rebellion, but as relief, a way to soften the edges of a life lived under constant projection. The industry rarely intervened, the audience rarely noticed. Survival, once again, was expected to be private. Recovery did not arrive as a redemption arc. It arrived as discipline, meetings, distance, a restructuring of daily life that demanded honesty without applause. She spoke openly about it later, not as confession, but as fact, another chapter that refused to stay hidden. Motherhood followed, sobriety followed, stability came and went. None of it erased the past, but it changed how she carried it. The symbol the world argued over was, in private, doing the unglamorous work of staying alive. The cost of being first is rarely paid once. It is paid repeatedly. In silence, in effort, in survival no one sees. Marilyn Chambers did not set out to become a turning point in American culture.
She became one because the culture needed one. Her story exposed a contradiction that could no longer be ignored, that the same society demanding purity was consuming transgression with equal appetite, that institutions preached
morality while profiting from curiosity, that a woman's image could be celebrated, discarded, and repurposed without her consent, all in the same breath. Long after the outrage faded, the boundaries she crossed remained altered. Conversations about censorship changed. So did discussions of agency, performance, and who controls a public narrative. What once seemed unthinkable became debated. What was forbidden became visible. Her legacy isn't defined by a single role or a single scandal. It lives in the uncomfortable space she forced into the open, a reminder that cultural progress often arrives through individuals who never asked to carry its weight. Marilyn Chambers endured the consequences of being early, of stepping forward before permission existed, of refusing to apologize for choices others were free to judge but never fully understand. In the end, she didn't reclaim the image that was taken from her. She outlived it. And in doing so, she left behind something far more permanent than controversy, a fracture in the illusion of moral certainty that could never be fully repaired.